Hello, I'm Nathan Johanning, Extension Educator for the University of Illinois Extension, and we're here today talking about a research trial that we have provided through the Illinois Specialty Crop Block Grant, looking at different cover cropping systems we can use in tomato and bell pepper production. So we're going to talk a little bit about this trial overall, which, as you'll see in these different the different treatments, we have bell peppers, and then we also have some tomatoes in the back, and we have different cultural practices that we're using as a part of this research. So what we're trying to do is see how we can incorporate cover crops into our bare ground production systems that have conventional tillage, and then looking at plasticulture, which is this first treatment we're looking at here, and how we can include cover crops into that. And then we're also looking at some newer innovative approaches, trying to incorporate concepts of no-till from some of our commodity crops where no-till has gained popularity, and how we can incorporate both no-till with and without a cover crop into this system. And within the no-till side of things, we're also looking at how can we terminate our cover crops. So we're talking about using a roller crimper for termination versus using a herbicide as well in that situation. So that's a little overview of this project. This is the second year of the research that we've had on this. So in this trial, we have, we're going to start off by looking at our plasticulture treatment. This did not have a cover crop under it. So in this case, this would be one of our standard grower practices for production. You have, the plasticulture is very common for the mulching and the early season warmth and heat that we gain. So you can see this would be kind of one of our kind of grower standards. So with this and all the other treatments, we have layered with and without cover crop treatments to compare, and our goal in the end is to figure out how we can incorporate cover crops effectively, and then use these tools to help make management recommendations so we can share this with growers so they can help to use some of these cover cropping strategies. A lot of these can be used for various reasons on the farm. It could be anywhere from concepts of weed management, which we'll see in some of these treatments, on down to looking at the differences between how we can help protect our soil over the winter, how we can build soil organic matter, and to the greater concepts of trying to help manage our nutrients and scavenge them over the winter, so that way we're hopefully reducing the nutrients that we're polluting into our streams and waterways, many of which naturally are occurring and are mineralized and come out of our soil. So how can we capture those and keep those on the farm? So we'll start off again, this is kind of our grower standard, just looking at plasticulture without any cover crop. And so now we'll move on, look at some of the other treatments. So here we have a no-till treatment that had a cover crop down. So in this case, the cover crop was terminated earlier in the season, about whenever it was about head height or around flowering, or when it had a full seed head formed. You can see a little bit, a lot of the residue with some of the time since that, which was in late May. We still have some residue you can see here, but after it's terminated and a few weeks pass, of course, a lot of that residue breaks down very quickly. But we did go in and transplanted all of these in here without doing any other tillage or any other work to that seed bed. So we did this as a part of this grant. We had a no-till transplanter, and so we were able to come in with that no-till transplanter and transplant directly into here. And that's how they were, as you can see, the plants were set here, and we used that on this treatment and any of the other treatments where you had plants that were planted directly in the soil, including the no-till and some of the other tillage treatments. So this is just kind of an illustration of one of the main ways that we could utilize a no-till cover crop situation. In some cases, you'll get to see in other treatments where we have more residue whenever we hold off on terminating that cover crop a little bit more. But what it's really nice to see from this year's research and also last is that we can still establish a very good crop under any of these conditions. And with all the things that these treatments that we've looked at from last year's research, all of them I think are very viable approaches to crop management. There's differences between each, but all of them yielded very well and did very well. So in this case, you can see just our standard crop. You say no-tilled in here. if you have, especially where we have some residue, you get benefits from not having tilled the soil. You don't bring up a fresh bank of new weed seeds to germinate, so you can kind of manage some of that weed germination. In this case, we did on these trials where we had things direct seeded, we did apply a pre-emergent herbicide such as dual magnum to use between the rows to help suppress some of the early weed growth, and we've just followed in by doing some hand weeding and then mowing to maintain some of the vegetation that's further between the rows. So this is, I think, a concept that we can take to the field and use in cases where growers are wanting to incorporate no-till, so we can build this into a program where we don't have to use tillage just to prepare our seed bed. All right, so this next treatment was a bare ground treatment where we had the residue disked and worked in. So in this case, in this trial this year, you can actually see a little bit more of the residue. We had some of that residue worked in, but this was disked and tilled up. And so we do have that cover crop out. Why would you do a situation like this? This does give you the benefit of that cover crop surviving over the winter, helping to hold nutrients, build your soil over the winter when otherwise that soil will be bare. And then with that, you can see we're still able to use that cover crop over winter and then disc it in and still plant as normal and have that crop growing and utilizing kind of maybe the best of both worlds for that production system. You can have your traditional production under tillage conditions, but then also have that cover crop helping you over the winter to hold on to nutrients and scavenge them for the future. So this treatment is our straight no-till treatment. So in this case, we had no cover crop residue down, and so this was strictly had no tillage done to it in the spring for field preparation, and then we transplanted into it again with our no-till transplanter. Another case where in this case we did use a burn down herbicide, so we did clean up any weeds that were emerged, and then did use a pre-emergent herbicide to help suppress the weeds early in the growth of our crop, and then just followed up with our with mowing to manage our row middles, and then just doing hand weeding to keep our rows in place. So again, you can look at this and see, we have a nice crop. We have that crop growing, and we didn't have to work all this row middle space and could preserve some of the soil structure and the soil properties there while still having our good growing crop in between. All right, next we have another grower standard, which is our bare ground production. So in this case, the ground was worked at planting, and we had transplants put in, which is a very traditional and probably one of the most original and traditional ways for planting a lot of our vegetable crops, is transplanted into conventionally tilled ground. So this is kind of a standard here. Again, you can see we have similar growth and compared with our other treatments here, and just wanted to include this as a standard so that way we can look and see how all of these stack up and how they perform together. This next treatment is our no-till treatment that had cereal rye. In this case, we had no herbicide, and we used our roller crimper to terminate the cover crop, which was our cereal rye. So in this case, we have, here you can see we've let that cereal rye get to its full maturity before we've done anything to it. So this is why we have tons of residue. So in this case, this is kind of where we're really able to maximize some of those benefits of that residue. So in this situation where you have all this residue, and this was, all these treatments had around 100 pounds per acre of cereal rye planted in the fall to give us nice biomass. Especially in this case, we wanted weed suppression to be our primary factor. Some benefits that we've seen in this system, and also you could see it the same if you could do the same with your herbicide treatment that you saw earlier if you extended that time before you terminated it. What we see a lot of is whenever we get all of this residue, similar to the plasticulture, we protect our fruit in the lower parts of our plants from a lot of rain splash and soil splash I've seen situations on this trial in previous years where we've had really heavy rains on some of our bare ground and worked soil conditions, and we'll get horrible soil splashing on the fruit that are just covered with soil, and so that takes itself to not only just the appearance, and although those trials still yield well, for a grower, that's that much more work that you have to do to wash those, which many of these fruit would be washed anyhow, but sometimes it may take an extra washing. You may have to change wash water and things more often, and other factors around that in order to get a clean, marketable fruit that you could pack in a box to take somewhere, or even just to take to a farmer's market. You know, in some cases, without some protection, say from plastic or from some of this residue, with the right weather conditions, there can be a huge amount of soil on those fruit. So the other nice thing you can see here, this again doesn't have any herbicide. We just used the cereal rye for weed suppression. We have gone in and done some hand weeding. However, realistically, we do get a lot of suppression of our of weeds. Also, one thing to note for the no-till, especially when you have all this residue, is if it was wet and you had to get out in this field, you have this nice bed of residue to walk around on, and so you're not sinking down to your ankles in mud. You have that cleaner fruit. You're able to access that field, because in some cases you may need to access that no matter the weather. If you have a market the next day, the goal of getting out in that field needs to happen no matter what the conditions might be. So there's this and many other benefits to some of these cover crop systems. So we've worked really hard to work with our transplanter and equipment so that way we can handle these kinds of situations. And this is one of the treatments that I'm happy to see being very viable. And our yields last year were very good from some of these no-till treatments with the cover crop, because I think this shows that if a grower wants to include this and has the ability to no-till these crops, that we can do that and not feel like we're making major sacrifices to our crop, or even sure if it would even work for these cropping systems, and being able to incorporate cover crops and no-till and some of these other soil health factors. So this is one of the main aspects of this project that we really wanted to see as kind of our ultimate treatment going from some of our grower standards. All right, our last treatment of the trial is a plasticulture treatment, where we laid the plastic into an area that had cereal rye cover crop planted last fall. So the cover crop for this case and for our other tillage treatments was terminated with a herbicide earlier, usually around 2 feet tall or a little bit shorter than that. We do that in order to not gain too much biomass, so that way we can still easily incorporate that cover crop into the soil, and then still be able to effectively make our tillage passes. So this is just, again, our plasticulture that had a cover crop down. You can still see little bits and remnants of some of the residue here. But again, a good way that we can, no different than our cover crop with our bare ground production, we can use our standard practice. We can implement some of these cover cropping and soil health practices over the winter in an alternate time of year when we don't have anything out in the field, and still use our traditional practices. Maybe it's for an earlier crop that we want to use, say the plasticulture for the early soil warming or mulching effect. And so we can still have some of the best of both worlds by having our cover cropping practices and also some of our, say, plasticulture and other conventional practices that we've been utilizing. So this gives you a little glimpse into the research trial this season at Urbana. With this project, we also have this replicated in southern Illinois, near Waterloo, Illinois, which is where my office and where I'm housed. So we're very interested to have all the data concluded from all these trials, and hopefully we'll be able to share all this when the trial is complete, and we can get a better perspective of how all these different cropping systems and cover cropping systems can work together. So again, my name is Nathan Johanning with the University of Illinois Extension, and if you have any questions about this trial, feel free to contact me at my email address, which you can find below. Thank you very much.